Hello and welcome to the 10th Scouching Report for the 2021 NHL Entry Draft. Today we're going to be looking at defenseman Brent Johnson of the Sioux Falls Stampede. So to say that Brent Johnson had what you would call a breakout season might be a little bit of an understatement. 2 seasons ago he was playing 16U AAA hockey in Dallas, Texas. Last year, he joined the prestigious Little Caesars program in Detroit, and after playing just 2 games at the USHL level last year, Brent Johnson immediately stepped into a top pair role with the Sioux Falls Stampede. That to me is a remarkable progression in his career, so obviously in this situation I had to dig in, especially when you look at the surface level data that he generated this year. And on that note, Brent Johnson in the USHL this season has been one of the biggest standouts in the entire league. A metric that I calculate using data from Pick224.com is what I call catalyst percentage, which is the percentage increase or decrease in even strength goal differential with the player on the ice relative to when they are off. So a player with a plus 100% total catalyst percentage is doubling the overall goal differentials at even strength when they're on the ice versus when they're off it. This data can also be broken down into offense only and defense only to further break down exactly how the player is impacting the game. And Brent Johnson is the only non-overage defender in the USHL this season with a total catalyst percentage of over plus 100%. Only Mason Lohrei, who is 2 years older than Brent Johnson in the USHL, scored more primary points at even strength than Johnson. And of all the even strength goals scored with Johnson on the ice, he had a goal or a primary assist on almost 30% of them, which for a defenseman is very, very notable. So when looking at surface level data, there is an argument to be made that the best USHL defender this season is a draft eligible defenseman who is not likely to be drafted in the first round of this year's draft, that had just 2 games of major junior experience before this season, and he jumped straight into the USHL and started playing top pair minutes. So to me, this is someone who definitely needs a closer look. So the questions are always going to be the same in situations like this. How is he putting up the data? Is the methods through which he's putting up the data sustainable over long periods of time? And, in my opinion, most importantly, could it be projected into the National Hockey League? So, to me, Brent Johnson is characterized by 2 very, very high-end parts of his game that will then break down separately. The first is inconsistent, but at his best, it is an excellent sense of 2 or even 3-layer defensive rush positioning and defensive separation ability, combined with remarkable problem-solving ability to take care of the puck, identify passing lanes, creating new ones with skill, and an ability to execute on those passing decisions safely and conservatively while still pushing play in the positive direction. On defensive rush scenarios, if all he really needs to do is a simple stick check or a stick lift, he can do it. And immediately after separating that puck, whether it's through the separation itself or a quick pass afterwards, he manages to get the pucks to line mates very, very effectively. If that doesn't work, while he's not the biggest player I've ever seen, he's certainly a player capable of imposing himself physically on opponents. And even if his level of strength isn't necessarily high end, if he comes face to face with you, he's gonna try to push you off the puck. And when those entries are controlled coming into the defensive end, he's certainly capable of sticking to those opponents, especially to push them along towards the boards. And I saw multiple occasions where Johnson just made it very difficult for his opponents to generate an offensive cycle in Brent's defensive end. And when he does create a turnover, I saw many, many instances where he found multiple ways to find space, find the puck, get it to safety, and just defuse pressure very, very quickly, and with a side of creativity as well. There are so many examples I can pull from that are just a series of diverse and unique talents that allow him to be both aware of where his line mates are and aware of where the open ice he can work with is. And to me, Brent Johnson just plays a very modern and oddly offensive styled defense-first game, if that makes any sense. And he might be a player that you consider a puck-moving defenseman, but more of a defensive puck-moving defenseman first, who then gets rewarded in the offensive zone for using those traits so well in the defensive zone. And when he does get some open ice and starts skating up the ice with the puck, I found that there's a very high-end skill level for a defenseman that I think is very projectable, especially considering how often he uses it to deceive opponents, guide them towards the middle of the ice and drive outside with his passing or carrying, and just keep opponents guessing as he's moving up the ice, which for me is something that you definitely need to see, especially to project into the National Hockey League. And to bring it back to the overall surface level data that I talked about off the top of this video, it is highly remarkable, but all of the things I've talked about so far are largely defensive traits of the game rather than offensive. So how is Brent Johnson scoring so much if the best parts of his game are more focused on defensive play and pressure defusing? And all you really have to look at is how he brings his skill and awareness of line mates and the vision that he can have with the puck and just put him in the offensive zone with those same traits. He can step up from the blue line very, very well with a decent shot, but better vision and creativity with his playmaking, and can certainly apply pressure to opposing defenses and push further in towards the net. And I felt that he got more and more aggressive with his offense as the year went on and he got more comfortable with the heavy workload he was shouldering with Sioux Falls. As the first 3 games I tracked, I showed 0 dangerous passes, and that was over 56 minutes of ice time in those 3 games. But in the remaining 4 games, there were no games where he had 0 attempts, and in his last 4 games tracked, he put up 6 dangerous pass attempts. And when you scale that for his ice time, it doesn't necessarily shoot him up my leaderboards when it comes to dangerous pass attempts for defensemen, and I certainly wouldn't consider Brent Johnson the most aggressive offensive defenseman that I've ever seen in my life, but it is still notable to see that increase, and if that does continue to improve as he goes to the NCAA and into the AHL and even the NHL, there could be a more dynamic player here. With the puck on his stick, he seemed to grow more confident as well, pushing deep in the offensive zone, going right below the goal line to apply pressure to opponents, resist pressure from opponents along the boards, and there was an increasing sense of resiliency with Brent Johnson's puck control, which is also something that he definitely will need as he gets older. The biggest thing with him is the awareness that he has around the ice, and how he's able to use his feet and his hands in conjunction with each other and together to open up ice, open up lanes, and find line mates around the ice and get the puck to them safely. And while he doesn't take the most aggressive approach to the game, I found that most of the time he just has a rock-solid conservative approach that really enables his more skilled line mates to finish for him, and I think that's where a lot of his production was coming from. But there of course were times where he could still be one of those aggressive and fun offensive defensemen that can make a play in the offensive zone. And that could be something that comes out more often, but he is a bit more of a meat and potatoes defensive player, good at isolating the puck, getting it to a line mate, and generating production through safe and responsible defensive play, and taking really good care of the puck when it is time for him to be responsible with it. There were some moments that I saw where his movements and fluidity are so smooth that you wonder how an opponent bit so hard to allow Brent Johnson so much open ice up the middle. But I feel like trying to counter Brent Johnson with his deception and skill, you'd probably do the same thing, only to have him pull the puck inside quickly on you, find a new lane, and he's off to the races up the ice. So Johnson's data and a lot of the video I've highlighted are really promising and really positive, but why would I have him in my 30s, and why do other people have him ranked much lower down their boards than myself? Johnson is mobile and he is fluid on his feet, and you're not really going to worry a ton about his functional footwork or how he's actually skating around the ice. And if he has time to use crossovers to generate speed, yeah, he can get moving up the ice pretty well, especially with the level of skill that he has. But under pressure, he certainly relies almost solely on his skill to navigate that pressure and escape it, and there was a major inconsistency when that stick check initially on defensive rushes didn't work and he wasn't face to face with a player. Pushing a player laterally towards the boards using his body was something I didn't see very often out of Johnson, and when he tried, it wasn't very successful a whole lot. So while his gap control is fine and his stick checking ability is very good, and if the player continues to come straight at Johnson, he can get in the way and push the player out of the way, but high-end defending in my eyes is more about pushing guys to the outside if your initial stick checks don't work, using your body to box out the middle of the ice and just minimize their offensive threat as much as you possibly can. And when it purely just comes to his work rate defensively, there are also just inconsistencies here with Johnson. Some nights he looked awesome and you could not get a puck around him. There were multiple games where his defensive zone controlled transition percentage was extremely low. But other times, his pressure application and ability to challenge opponents consistently was really all over the place. And surrounding these issues around generating speed very quickly and using his strength to his advantage more often, I found that he could sometimes force the game to go his way a little bit and just try to do too much and lose focus here and there, and he could just at times be too easy to beat by challenging defenders too aggressively rather than letting the game come to him a little bit better. And when I'm looking at defensemen, it is notable to see a defenseman with such good defensive rush talent like Brent Johnson not necessarily being such a spectacular player when it comes to suppressing dangerous shot attempts against. And I found that there were times where Brent Johnson just had some trouble being aware of opposing passing lanes. He'd get caught puck watching and pucks would just go straight through him cross ice on passing attempts. And all these things can lead to multiple extended defensive pressure scenarios. I can see how a number of these inconsistencies and issues might lead to a bit of an inflated rate of dangerous shot attempts against. So it just seemed to revolve around a bit of a lack of focus and a lack of strength on his frame and generating a lot of quickness with his feet that kind of made Brent Johnson a very good defender in specific scenarios and not quite as good in others. With the puck at his best, Brent Johnson is a player with, I think, a tremendous amount of potential, especially when you consider just how smart he is, how skilled he is, and how crafty he is at managing the puck and taking care of the puck for his line mates and enabling them to play productively. But with this player, there are definitely some roadblocks that will have to be worked through. So what's the best part of Brent Johnson's game? Brent Johnson's ability to use skill to evade pressure is really interesting. He's a great pressure valve for his team. He can unload a heck of a lot of pressure for his team constantly and just manage the puck well and turn play around and move it offensively, unlike pretty much any defender I've seen this year on as much of a consistent basis as Johnson. And that, plus his awareness of his line mates at almost all times, is a large part of what drove his great pass percentage of over 75% on just shy of 100 attempts per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. Not a whole lot of players get up to that level of completion rates for defensemen, but Johnson did it. Especially for a North American defenseman, that is notable in my data set. The creativity, the sense of deception, the awareness of line mates, all of this really just means Brent Johnson is a really good player who can just help his line mates sleep better at night. There may be situations here and there where he can play with fire and invite too much pressure on himself, and that still might be part of the adjustment to the USHL, but he plays with a lot of confidence, he knows how to manage that pressure effectively, and with time, I think you can reinforce this area of the game to be even stronger than it is. The good part of Johnson's game is the defensive transition play. It wasn't perfect and it was quite inconsistent on a game-by-game basis, and there are factors behind that, but he has a largely very fundamentally strong and modern style of defending with multiple layers on a checklist that he can go through and reliably pull off more often than not. His stick-checking ability and separation ability on entries is great, and he combines that with secondary physical imposition that works out more often than it didn't. But there were many instances where I just thought, okay, if he was a bit quicker and or a bit stronger, he'd probably have a much easier time in this specific scenario, and those things should be things that improve over the next few years. He steps into rushing and passing lanes constantly stick first and separates pucks extremely well, and he may not be the strongest player available in this year's draft or the meanest physical player or the best player at boxing out players in front of the net to prevent high danger chances, but as long as he gets quicker and continues to keep his feet moving and just learns how to pressure guys a little bit more, I think his defensive game could improve pretty significantly past just defensive rush scenarios. The not so good part with Johnson kind of revolves around what I would consider a lack of focus from time to time. And again, this might be part of the adjustment to the USHL from under 16 AAA hockey. He just seems to not know the pace of play that he has to deal with on a consistent basis. He invites too much pressure into himself. He stops moving his feet on defensive scenarios, and if he does fall a step or two behind, he just doesn't have the quickness or imposition to catch up and really grind that play down. And there were situations where you just wished he would put in a little bit more to keep up with the pace of play a little bit better. And he felt like a player that just made a bit more work for himself than was necessary, and for such a smart problem solver and such a skilled defender, I think this should go away over time, but it did seem to be a bit of an issue between the ears, which might be a bit more of an issue to work through over the next little while, but I still remain optimistic. So with Brent Johnson, how I want to leave it is reiterate that there has been a significant progression in the roles that he plays in hockey over the last few years. Up to this point, going from Texas to Little Caesars to top pair minutes in the USHL, is a steep progression curve, and with the results that he put up this year, his potential from here could be pretty enormous. He has shouldered a tremendous workload. He is one of the highest workload players I have tracked all season, and he drove results in multiple areas as a USHL rookie exceptionally well. While I don't believe Brent Johnson is quite as good as his surface level data might indicate, I do really believe that with a few more years of development and a few improvements in key areas of the game where he might be a little bit lackluster, you could be seeing Brent Johnson as a really solid defense-first defenseman with solid offensive traits and production generation through that vision, creativity, and puck management that he's so good at already today. My checklist for him moving forward is just getting stronger on his frame and getting quicker on his feet, especially in his first few steps to escape defensive scenarios, and allow him to not rely solely on his skill to evade pressure and create new rushing or passing lanes. And while I have Johnson in the back half of the 30s on my board right now, I can absolutely see a case to be made that he should be a late first round pick this year, similar to another player from the Sioux Falls Stampede, and another player that we did as a Scouching Report, and another player with the last name Johnson in Ryan Johnson, a Buffalo Sabres draft pick from 2019. So without real improvements in Brent Johnson's speed generation and open ice skating ability, I don't really see him being a quarterback offensive defenseman, but you might be able to run a power play through him here and there. And to me, there are unique and projectable skills at his best, and inconsistencies that I would consider troubling, but the things that you need to do to fix those are things that only really take time to improve. So hopefully over the next few years, there's more and more progression in Johnson's game, and I think there is a universe where Brent Johnson comes out as one of the more interesting defenders that come out of this year's draft class. He may not be the flashiest player, he might not be the most important defender you have in your system, but if this is a guy you can get outside the top 2 rounds this season, yeah, I'm pretty sure I would be running up to the podium to make that pick. So that's it for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube by clicking join below. You'll get access to early access to videos, exclusive written reports, data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted prospects, merchandise discounts, and plenty of other goodies. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's it, and we'll see you all in the next one.